Ada, a young woman desperate to find a solution to her crumbling life. She had just been fired from her job as a cashier at a grocery store, accused of stealing money from the till, a crime she didn't commit. Her landlord had given her 3 days to pack out of a cramped, one-room apartment if she didn't pay the overdue rent. On top of it all, her mother's health had taken a turn for the worse, and the doctor demanded money for surgery. As Ada trudged home, exhausted and defeated, a gust of wind sent a colorful piece of paper fluttering against her leg. She bent to pick it up. The Glory Fountain Assembly, it read in bold letters, accompanied by an image of a man in a white suit smiling broadly. The text promised miracles, healings, financial breakthroughs, and freedom from spiritual bondage. Beneath the flyer, in red ink, were the words, "Come and see the wonders of God. Your life will never be the same." She stuffed the paper into her pocket, intending to ignore it. But that night, as the power went out in her apartment and she sat alone in the darkness, something tugged at her heart. "What do I have to lose?" she muttered. The next morning, Ada put on her only clean dress and set out for the church, unaware that the journey she was embarking on would change her life forever, and not in the way she hoped. The church loomed ahead, a massive, glass-fronted building with a glowing cross mounted on the roof. The parking lot was packed with flashy cars, their owners strolling toward the entrance, dressed in their finest clothes. Ada felt out of place in her worn sandals and faded dress, but something pushed her forward. Inside, the church was a sensory overload. Lights pulsed in rhythm with the upbeat worship music, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and incense. The congregation swayed, clapping and singing along with the choir. At the front of the stage stood the man from the flyer, Daddy. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes and a voice that boomed through the speakers. His white suit shimmered under the lights as he waved his hand over the crowd, prompting bursts of ecstatic cries. "Today is your day of deliverance," Daddy proclaimed. "Whatever brought you here will not follow you back." The crowd erupted in cheers. "Amen." Ada found a seat near the back, her heart pounding. As Daddy continued to preach, Ada couldn't shake the strange chill that crawled up her spine. As the service went on, Ada became increasingly uncomfortable. There was something hypnotic about Daddy's voice, something that made her heart race and her thoughts blur. Yet, the desperation that had led her here forced her to stay. After a series of testimonies, Daddy announced, "The Spirit of God is moving in this place. You, my daughter." He pointed directly at Ada, his sharp gaze pinning her in place. She froze. Her heart hammered in her chest as people turned to look at her. "Me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, you," Daddy bellowed. "Come forward. Today is your day of freedom." Ada hesitated, but the murmurs of encouragement from the congregation pushed her to her feet. She walked to the front, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. When she reached the altar, Daddy extended his hand toward her. "What troubles you, my child?" Ada hesitated. "My life is falling apart," she finally said. "I've lost my job, my home, and my mother is sick. I don't know what to do anymore." Daddy nodded solemnly. "The enemy has been working against you. But today, God will set you free." The crowd erupted in applause and shouts of "Amen." Daddy placed his hand on Ada's forehead. His touch was ice cold, sending a shiver down her spine. He began to pray in a strange, guttural language that made Ada feel lightheaded. Suddenly, she felt a force push her backward, and she collapsed onto the ground. The congregation cheered as Daddy declared, "She is delivered." But as Ada lay there, her vision blurred, she thought she saw something move beneath the stage, a dark, slithering shadow that sent a wave of terror through her. That night, Ada couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, haunted by the image of the shadow she had seen. Was it her imagination? Or was there something truly sinister about the church? Around midnight, she was startled by a knock at her door. She froze, her heart pounding. "Who's there?" she called out. "It's me, Esther," a woman's voice replied. Ada hesitated before opening the door. Standing there was one of the ushers from the church, a petite woman with tired eyes and a nervous demeanor. "Can I come in?" Esther asked in a whisper, glancing over her shoulder. Ada nodded, stepping aside. "What are you doing here?" Esther sat down, wringing her hands. "I need to warn you," she said. "You shouldn't go back to that church." Ada frowned. "Why not?" "Daddy said my problems would be solved if I kept coming." Esther shook her head. "That's what he wants you to believe. But the power he uses, it's not from God." "What are you talking about?" Esther leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Daddy is not who he says he is. He's using dark powers, and he feeds off the souls of people like you, desperate people who come to him for help. That's how he performs those miracles." Ada felt a chill run down her spine. "But, why are you telling me this? Aren't you part of the church?" "I was," Esther admitted. "But I've seen too much. I've seen people disappear, people who question him. And I've seen him." "Him?" Ada echoed, her voice barely audible. Esther hesitated, then whispered, "The python. It's his true form. He hides it, but sometimes you can see it in the shadows." Ada's blood ran cold. The shadow she had seen beneath the stage, was it the python Esther was talking about? "You need to leave town," Esther said urgently. "If he finds out I warned you, we'll both be in danger." Before Ada could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. Both women froze. "Open the door," a deep voice commanded from the other side. Esther's face paled. "It's one of his men," she whispered. "You can't let them in." Ada's heart raced as the knocking grew louder. She motioned for Esther to hide in the corner while she approached the door. "Who is it?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Security from the church," the voice replied. "We need to speak with you." Ada hesitated, her hand hovering over the lock. Before she could decide, the door burst open, and two large men stepped inside. They scanned the room, their eyes narrowing when they spotted Esther. "You," one of them said, pointing at her. "You've been warned about speaking out." Esther bolted for the window, but the men were faster. They grabbed her, dragging her toward the door. "Wait!" Ada shouted. "What are you doing? Let her go." One of the men turned to her, his expression cold. "Stay out of this if you know what's good for you." Ada wanted to fight, to do something, but fear rooted her to the spot. She watched helplessly as they dragged Esther out into the night. Before they left, one of the men looked back at her. "Daddy knows everything. Be careful, or you'll be next." The door slammed shut, leaving Ada trembling in the silence. The next morning, Ada felt paralyzed with fear and indecision. Esther's warning echoed in her mind, but the reality of her situation left her with no options. Where could she go? She had no money, no family to turn to, and nowhere to hide. Yet, curiosity gnawed at her, along with the lingering sense of dread. Determined to find out the truth, Ada returned to the Glory Fountain Assembly. This time, she stayed after the service ended, hiding in the shadows as the congregation filtered out. When the sanctuary was nearly empty, she crept toward the back of the stage. The air seemed colder here, heavy with an unexplainable pressure. She knelt and peered underneath the raised platform. At first, she saw nothing but darkness, but then a faint, rhythmic hissing sound reached her ears. Her heart pounded as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. In the gloom, she could make out a large, writhing shape coiled around the beams beneath the stage. It moved with a fluid, hypnotic grace, its scales gleaming faintly. The shadow of a massive python. Ada clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Her legs threatened to give out beneath her, but she forced herself to back away quietly. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was low and calm, but it sent chills down Ada's spine. She turned and saw one of the senior pastors standing behind her, his face unreadable. I was just... "Curiosity can be dangerous," the man interrupted. He stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with something sinister. "You've seen too much." Before she could react, his hand shot out, gripping her arm. The coldness of his touch spread through her body like ice. When Ada woke, she was lying in the center of the sanctuary, surrounded by dimly flickering candles. Daddy stood before her, his white suit glowing eerily in the low light. "You're a stubborn one," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "Most people just take the miracles and leave. But you had to dig deeper." Ada struggled to move, but her body felt heavy, as though invisible chains were holding her down. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Daddy smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was cold, predatory. "What do I want?" "I want what you came here to give, your faith, your devotion, your soul." He stepped closer, and as he did, his form began to shift. His skin darkened and turned scaly, his eyes narrowed into slits, and his mouth widened into a grotesque grin filled with fangs. His lower body elongated, transforming into the massive coils of a python. Ada gasped, terror gripping her as she stared at the creature before her. "This is my true form," Daddy said, his voice now a deep, guttural hiss. "I am Okizu, the serpent of power and dominion. The miracles, the healings, the wealth, it all comes at a price. Every soul that steps into this church belongs to me." "You're lying," Ada said, though her voice trembled. "You're just a demon masquerading as a servant of God." Daddy laughed, the sound echoing like thunder in the cavernous sanctuary. "Call me what you will, but you cannot deny the results. Haven't I given people what they came here for? Haven't I turned their despair into joy? That is the only truth that matters." He leaned closer, his cold, reptilian breath washing over her. "And now, Ada, you will join them. You will be my vessel, a servant to carry out my will." As Daddy began to chant in a strange language, Ada felt a burning sensation on her forehead. She cried out, riding against the invisible chains. Images flashed through her mind, faces of people she had seen in the church, their eyes hollow and lifeless. She realized with horror that these were the souls Daddy had consumed. But then, amidst the chaos, a voice broke through the darkness. "Ada." She opened her eyes and saw Esther standing at the edge of the sanctuary, clutching a crude wooden cross. Her face was bruised, and her hands trembled, but her gaze was fierce. "Let her go, Okizu," Esther shouted, holding the cross aloft. Daddy turned, his serpent eyes narrowing. "You dare to return? You will not take her," Esther said, stepping forward. "Your power is built on lies and blood, and it will crumble." Daddy laughed again, but there was a flicker of unease in his expression. "You think that little trinket can stop me?" Esther didn't reply. She began to pray, her voice steady and filled with conviction. As she did, the air in the sanctuary seemed to shift. The candles flickered violently, and the python recoiled slightly. Ada felt the invisible chains loosen, and with a surge of strength, she scrambled to her feet. "Run!" Esther shouted. But Ada didn't run. Instead, she grabbed one of the candles and held it at the base of the stage. The flame caught on the heavy velvet curtain, and within seconds, the fire began to spread. "No!" Daddy roared, his serpent form writhing in fury. Esther grabbed Ada's hand, pulling her toward the exit. As they ran, the sanctuary filled with smoke and flames, and the sound of Daddy's furious hissing echoed in their ears. Outside, Ada and Esther collapsed onto the ground, coughing and gasping for air. Behind them, the church burned, the flames consuming the building and the darkness within it. "Is he dead?" Ada asked, her voice shaking. Esther shook her head. "You can't kill something like him. But his power is tied to that place. Without it, he's weakened." Ada stared at the burning church, a mixture of relief and fear washing over her. "What do we do now?" "We keep moving," Esther said. "There are others like him, other churches, other lies. But we can fight them." Ada's growing suspicions led her to explore the church late at night. She discovered hidden passageways behind the sanctuary, filled with strange symbols and relics. One room contained jars of blood and personal items, bracelets, rings, photographs. Esther explained their significance. "Those are tokens of the covenants Daddy makes with his followers. They think they are receiving blessings, but they are offering their souls in exchange." Ada's final discovery was a leather-bound book hidden in Daddy's office. It detailed the origins of his power, revealing that he had made a pact with the ancient spirit of a python in exchange for immortality and dominion. The spirit demanded constant offerings, souls drained through rituals disguised as miracles. The confrontation with Daddy became a battle of wills and strategy. As Esther prayed fervently, Ada used the knowledge she had gained from the book to disrupt Daddy's connection to his power. They discovered that Daddy's strength was tied to an ancient altar hidden beneath the stage. With Esther's help, Ada destroyed the altar, breaking the python's hold on the church. The flames that consumed the sanctuary were not just physical, they were spiritual, purging the darkness that had taken root. Though they had escaped, Ada and Esther knew their fight wasn't over. They began traveling together, warning others about churches like the Glory Fountain Assembly. Along the way, they met other survivors, people who had escaped the clutches of similar dark leaders. Together, they formed a network, determined to expose the truth and protect the vulnerable. Ada's journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose. She had lost everything, but she had found her strength. This story teaches that true faith requires discernment, courage, and wisdom. It warns that not everything that appears holy is from God and that deception thrives where people do not question or seek the truth. It also emphasizes that evil exists, even in places meant to be sacred, but it can be confronted and defeated. People must be vigilant, test the spirits, and trust in God rather than blindly following charismatic leaders. Most importantly, the story highlights that freedom from deception comes at a cost, but truth always prevails in the end. If you find this helpful, please subscribe, like and comment your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you.